Welcome back. If you are a curious learner, someone who really wants to understand how global power actually works behind the scenes, you are in the exact right place today.
Absolutely.
Because today our mission is to look at the massive, just the gaping divide between what politicians say is happening and what the battlefield actually shows regarding Operation Epic Fury.
Right, the ongoing U.S. military conflict with Iran.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for this deep dive, we are drawing entirely from a single, highly detailed source. It's a transcript of an analysis by commentator Daniel Davis from his YouTube channel.
Yeah, specifically a video he put out titled U.S. Power Limit Surfacing for All to See.
And I want to be super clear up front. Our goal here is not to take sides or endorse any specific political view, left or right. We are just here to impartially examine the perspectives laid out in this specific analysis.
Yeah, we're basically contrasting the administration's highly optimistic claims of this imminent victory with Davis's, well, his deeply critical look at the tactical and economic realities on the ground.
So let me ask you a question to kick things off. When the world's most powerful military engages an adversary, what happens when the fight goes off the spreadsheet and into the mountains, the global supply chains, and ultimately your own wallet?
That is really the defining tension of this entire conflict. I mean, we are trained by decades of history to look at military power as just a math equation.
Right.
Like column A is the defense budget, column B is the number of advanced aircraft, and whoever has the bigger numbers automatically dictates the outcome on the ground. But Davis's analysis completely deconstructs that assumption.
Well, let's start with column A then, the official narrative provided in the source, because the messaging from the administration is incredibly confident. You have President Trump quoted claiming that under his leadership, the U.S. is actively ending Iranian nuclear blackmail and terror aggression. He actually stated that we are, quote, closer than ever to the rise of the Middle East that is finally free at last.
Yeah, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio projected this entire conflict will be wrapped up in just 2 to 3 weeks.
Which is wild. If you just listen to those statements, you picture an imminent, clean, decisive victory.
But Davis immediately throws a physical map at that rhetorical narrative. He argues that the claim of a stabilizing or free Middle East completely contradicts the reality of the geography right now.
Right. He points out the region hasn't been this physically inflamed since the 1973 Arab-Israeli War.
Exactly. This is not some localized, contained surgical strike. The conflict expanded almost overnight into a multi-front regional war.
The details he provides on that expansion are staggering. I mean, you have the Houthis fully joining in from Yemen. You have Lebanese Hezbollah in the north, and Qatif Hezbollah in Iraq mobilizing. Missiles are actively flying across the airspace of the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Iran. American aircraft have reportedly been destroyed on the tarmac. And crucially, the Strait of Hormuz remains firmly closed and under Iranian control.
Let's actually pause on the Strait of Hormuz for a second because it is impossible to overstate its importance. It's a narrow waterway, only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point.
Wow, that is narrow.
It is. And roughly 20% of the world's total global oil consumption passes through that specific choke point.
20%.
Yeah, so Davis highlights that controlling or closing that strait is a primary metric of success or failure in a regional conflict. If the stated goal of the operation is stability, but vital global waterways are physically blockaded and multiple nations are engulfed in missile exchanges.
There's a severe disconnect between the political rhetoric and the physical reality.
Exactly.
I want to push back on the administration's primary justification for a second, based on the evidence Davis presents. Because the entire premise of this operation was framed around ending nuclear blackmail.
Right.
But looking at the timeline Davis lays out, this feels a bit like claiming you're putting out a raging fire in a building that, well, already burned to the ground last year.
That is precisely the contradiction the source zeroes in on.
Davis notes that the administration had allegedly already obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities well before this current operation. He specifically cites 2025 Senate testimony from Tulsi Gabbard, where she publicly acknowledged that those facilities were destroyed and had not been rebuilt. On top of that, Davis points out that on February 26th, Iran actually offered a policy of zero enrichment and agreed to bring in significant external observers to validate it.
And we should probably clarify what zero enrichment actually means mechanically because it's a critical technical detail in Davis's argument.
Yeah, break that down.
So, uranium pulled from the ground cannot be used for a weapon. It has to be spun in centrifuges to isolate a highly unstable isotope called U-235.
Okay.
Civilian power plants need it enriched to a low level, but a nuclear weapon requires it to be enriched to roughly 90%. When a nation offers zero enrichment with external observers, they are basically offering to let international scientists physically walk into their facilities, unplug the centrifuges, and verify that the mechanical process of isolating those isotopes has entirely stopped.
So Davis is posing a very logical question here. How can there be an ongoing threat of nuclear blackmail if the physical facilities were already destroyed months ago and the adversary is actively offering open inspections to prove they aren't spinning centrifuges?
Right. His analysis suggests that the stated justifications for the war simply do not align with the chronological facts on the ground. He's asking you to look past the political framing and examine the tangible battlefield results.
Which brings up a massive operational question. If Iran is facing the absolute full might of the United States military, and we were on day 29 of Operation Epic Fury.
Nearly a full month in.
Yeah, nearly a month.
Yeah.
How are they even physically capable of keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed or launching regional attacks?
Yeah.
Why isn't this wrapped up?
This is where Davis dives into the core tactical problem. Despite the U.S. possessing what the administration calls the greatest military by far, they are hitting severe operational limits. The spreadsheet of American military might is violently clashing with the actual geography of the Middle East.
Hold on, though. The source mentions the U.S. has hit something like 10,000 to 12,000 surface targets in the past month. We have a defense budget approaching $1 trillion. If you drop 10,000 advanced bombs on a country, shouldn't that completely paralyze their ability to function?
You would absolutely think so if you're only looking at traditional 20th century metrics of warfare. But Davis explains that blowing up 10,000 surface targets...
Mr. What, exactly?
Well, it often includes empty radar sites, decoy launch pads, or just basic paved infrastructure. And that does almost nothing to penetrate Iran's core defensive architecture.
Ah.
We are talking about deeply buried subterranean installations that Davis refers to as mountain military missile cities.
So the surface level is essentially a decoy. The actual threat is buried. But wait, don't we have bunker-busting bombs specifically designed for that? I mean, that's what they're for, right?
We do, but it comes down to geology and basic physics. A bunker buster relies on kinetic energy and explosive yield to crack through reinforced concrete. But these facilities aren't just basements with thick ceilings.
Right.
They are carved deep into solid mountain ranges, sometimes hundreds of feet beneath the rock. No conventional bomb in the U.S. arsenal can reliably penetrate hundreds of feet of solid granite to destroy the missile stockpiles hidden inside.
Oh, wow. So we are spending incredible amounts of money blowing up easily replaceable surface targets while their actual strategic arsenal remains totally intact underground.
Exactly. And that leads to the inventory crisis Davis highlights, because modern warfare isn't just about explosive power, it is entirely about endurance and supply chains.
Okay.
According to his analysis, the math of this conflict is becoming terrifyingly unsustainable for the U.S. The military is burning through multi-million-dollar, highly advanced missiles at a staggering rate. He points out critical shortages of interceptors.
Like which ones?
Specifically the PASI-3s, the TA systems, and the erode 2 and 3 systems used to defend Israel.
Let's break that down for a second, because I think people assume a missile is just a missile. Why is running low on interceptors so catastrophic? Can't we just, build more?
Not quickly and not cheaply. It's what military analysts call an asymmetric cost curve.
Okay, an asymmetric cost curve.
Right. So an incoming drone or a rudimentary ballistic missile fired from one of those mountain bunkers might cost the adversary $50,000 to build. But the PASI-3 missile the U.S. fires to shoot that drone out of the sky, that costs roughly $4 million.
$4 million for one interceptor.
Yeah. A single Fayed interceptor is even more expensive, and the physical manufacturing process for these systems is incredibly slow and complex. You cannot just flip a switch and mass-produce them overnight.
Right.
Davis argues the U.S. is fundamentally running out of the very shields required to protect its assets. On top of that, he notes we are dangerously low on offensive Tomahawk cruise missiles, too.
Which makes the ground situation even more precarious. The source details that there are currently about 10,000 U.S. ground troops, Marines, Airborne, Army Special Forces deployed in the region right now, with another 10,000 on alert to arrive in 3 to 4 weeks. If we're running out of the interceptors needed to defend the airspace, those ground troops are sitting in an incredibly vulnerable position.
Davis sees those troop deployments as a massive vulnerability, not a tactical advantage. And what's really fascinating in his breakdown is that even the administration seems to be encountering the friction of this reality.
Yeah, he notes that President Trump publicly expressed surprise that NATO didn't step in to join the fight.
Right, the assumption was that this would be a low-risk coalition-backed sweep. But when that didn't happen, the president admitted that there are always surprises in war and even stated, quote, sometimes wars are lost that should be won.
To hear a sitting president say, sometimes wars are lost that should be won in the middle of a conflict, that is a stunning admission. It implies a deep miscalculation. How did American intelligence underestimate this adversary so badly?
To understand that miscalculation, Davis asks us to look at what he calls the weakness paradox.
The weakness paradox.
Yeah. Back in January, the prevailing narrative in Washington was that Iran was at its absolute weakest point in 47 years. Their economy was struggling. They were dealing with massive internal protests.
Well, it looks like they were crumbling.
Exactly.
Wow.
The operating theory was very confident. They thought if the U.S. executed a quick decapitation strike, the entire command structure would fracture and the regime would just crumble.
And the U.S. military actually pulled that off. The source points out that the U.S. successfully assassinated Iran's supreme leader on the very first shot of the conflict.
They executed the tactical strike perfectly. But Davis highlights that what followed is a masterclass in misunderstanding an adversary's organizational structure. Taking out the leader didn't end the war. In fact, exactly what Iran warned would happen, happened.
Because their military wasn't built like a rigid pyramid.
Exactly. Davis explains they operate on a highly decentralized command structure. Think of it less like a traditional corporation, where if the CEO suddenly vanishes, the entire company freezes waiting for orders. It's more like a franchise model. If corporate headquarters burns down,
The local branch still knows exactly how to make the burgers and operate the drive-thru.
yes, exactly. When the supreme leader was assassinated, the regional commanders already had their standing orders. They seamlessly leapt into action, a new leader was quickly appointed, and the war machine kept functioning without missing a single beat.
So we completely misread what weakness looks like. We assumed internal protests and economic friction meant military fragility. But their military was specifically engineered over decades to absorb exactly this kind of catastrophic top-down blow.
And Davis leans heavily on historical precedent to explain why this shouldn't have been a surprise. He reminds you of Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war.
Right, there's a pattern.
The common thread in all these conflicts is that smaller, less conventionally equipped forces survive and fight on through sheer endurance. The mathematical spreadsheet predicted they would collapse under the weight of industrial warfare, but the reality on the ground proved that air supremacy cannot break a decentralized force willing to absorb punishment.
And Davis makes a very specific historical comparison for Iran itself, which I found fascinating. He points out that in the 1980s, Iran fought an unimaginably brutal 8-year war with Iraq.
Oh, yeah.
They absorbed hundreds of thousands of casualties, faced chemical weapons, dealt with immense economic privation, and they never capitulated.
No.
And they did all of that when they were vastly less equipped and less technologically advanced than they are right now. Davis is essentially asking, if they didn't break during an 8-year bloodbath back then, why on earth did our intelligence assume they would shatter in 3 weeks today?
It points to a profound failure of analysis regarding the adversary's psychological resilience. And Davis argues this strategic blind spot is compounded by a deep hypocrisy in how the U.S. morally frames the conflict to the public.
Let's unpack the embassy comments, because Davis goes right after this point. Secretary Rubio recently argued that the U.S. needs to end this regime quickly because they are, quote, radical lunatics who cannot be allowed to possess nuclear weapons. And the specific example Rubio cited to prove their radical lunacy was that they launched strikes against diplomatic embassies.
Which, under international law, is a massive violation. Attacking a diplomatic mission is universally considered crossing a major red line.
Right. But Davis immediately pushes back with a very glaring, very recent counterexample. He points out that just a few years ago, in 2023, Israel deliberately targeted and destroyed an Iranian embassy building in Syria. They completely leveled a diplomatic facility. And the U.S. response to that, total silence, zero condemnation. So Davis's argument here is that the administration cannot credibly use embassy strikes as proof of unique radical lunacy to justify a war when allied nations do the exact same thing with tacit American approval.
Davis used that example to argue that the moral narrative presented to the American public is fundamentally inconsistent. So let's just synthesize his overall argument up to this point.
Okay.
The moral justification is inconsistent, the military's advanced interceptor inventory is critically depleted, the adversary's decentralized command easily survived a decapitation strike, and the conflict is already stretching well past the promised timeline.
Which means we have to look outside the battlefield. This is the pivot where Davis's analysis stops being an abstract discussion about foreign policy and starts directly impacting you, the listener.
Yeah, this is where it gets real.
Because if you are listening to this on your commute or while you're at the grocery store thinking, okay, this is bad, but it's happening thousands of miles away in the mountains of the Middle East, well, Davis provides some incredibly sobering economic data. There are global supply chain clocks ticking down right now, and they are about to go off.
In a hyper-connected global economy, the ripple effects of closing a waterway like the Strait of Hormuz are instantaneous. Davis starts with the most immediate visible metric, which is the price of oil.
Right. According to his data, Brent crude closed at $111 a barrel yesterday. But with the Houthis officially entering the conflict and expanding the threat to shipping, Davis predicts oil could easily gap up to $120 a barrel the minute markets open on Monday.
And we all know $120 a barrel isn't just a terrifying number for Wall Street traders. It translates immediately to the cost of gasoline and diesel at your local pump.
Yeah, exactly.
When diesel prices spike, the cost of transporting every single good on a truck spikes, which drives up the cost of everything. But Davis warns the crisis goes much deeper than just fuel.
The natural gas disruption is the part that genuinely shocked me, because it directly impacts the global food supply. Davis explains that the disruption in natural gas isn't just about heating homes, it is causing a massive shortage in global fertilizer production.
Let's explain the mechanics of that because it isn't obvious at first glance.
Yeah, natural gas for fertilizer.
Right. Natural gas isn't just burned for energy, it's a critical chemical feedstock. The methane in natural gas is used as a source of hydrogen, which is then combined with nitrogen from the air to create ammonia.
Okay, ammonia.
And ammonia is the foundational building block for almost all commercial agricultural fertilizers. If the natural gas supply from the Middle East is choked off, fertilizer plants shut down. If farmers don't have fertilizer, crop yields plummet. Davis is warning that we're looking down the barrel of a rapid, cascading agricultural crisis.
So no gas means no ammonia, which means no food.
Basically, yeah.
And as if an agricultural crisis wasn't enough, Davis identifies an even faster ticking clock in the tech sector, specifically the microchip manufacturing industry in Taiwan.
This is perhaps the most fragile bottleneck in the modern global economy. Taiwan manufactures the vast majority of the world's advanced microchips. Everything from the smartphone in your pocket, to the medical equipment in your hospital, to the computer running the car you are driving right now, relies on Taiwanese fabrication plants.
But Davis points out that Taiwan relies incredibly heavily on natural gas feedstocks shipped directly from Qatar, along with other specialized gases like helium, to run those plants.
Exactly. Fabricating a microchip requires hyperpure environments and very specific chemical reactions. You need those specific gases to etch the silicon wafers.
Right.
And Qatar is one of the world's primary suppliers of those specific feedstocks. Because the Middle East is inflamed and shipping lanes are under threat, those highly specialized supply lines are choked.
And Davis warns that Taiwan's chip manufacturing will hit a critical crisis point in just 2 to 3 weeks. They simply do not have the strategic reserves to keep producing chips without those Qatari shipments.
Which brings Davis's analysis full circle back to the domestic political reality in the U.S. He connects these global economic crises directly to the administration's political survival.
How so?
Well, you have rising oil prices driving inflation, a looming fertilizer shortage threatening food prices, and a microchip bottleneck threatening the entire manufacturing sector.
It is the definition of public pain. Davis argues that this immediate visible financial pain will rapidly bleed domestic support away from President Trump. It makes his broader domestic political agenda incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to execute.
Right, because public pain always overrules optimistic rhetoric.
Exactly. You can have officials like Secretary of War Pete Hegseth standing at a podium projecting absolute confidence about military dominance, but when a family cannot afford their grocery bill or the gas to get to work, those speeches stop working entirely.
Which forces us to reinterpret the administration's timeline. Think back to the beginning of the source material. When Secretary Rubio confidently states that this conflict will be wrapped up in 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah?
Is that genuinely a military assessment of how long it takes to defeat a decentralized adversary entrenched in mountain
Oh,
bunkers?
wow. Wait, if you follow Davis's logic, it's
I
not.
don't.
That 2 to 3 week timeline isn't a promise of military victory. It is a recognition of the economic countdown. It
Exactly.
is exactly how long the U.S. has before the Taiwanese chip shortage, the fertilizer shortage, and the oil spike become entirely unmanageable. It's
Mhm.
not a victory timeline, it's a global economic time bomb.
That is the stark conclusion drawn from Davis's analysis. He frames this entire operation not as a guaranteed march toward victory, but as a desperate race against economic collapse and tactical exhaustion.
So what does this all mean for us, the curious learners trying to make sense of this? If we step back and look at what we've unpacked today from Daniel Davis's deep dive, we have this incredible, undeniable core tension. On one side, you have a political administration operating with supreme public confidence, using the rhetoric of imminent victory and pointing to overwhelming spreadsheet dominance.
And on the other side, you have Davis documenting a very different physical reality. Severe tactical limits, drained multi-million-dollar interceptor inventories, an adversary whose decentralized structure easily absorbed a decapitation strike, and a looming global economic crisis tied to oil, agriculture, and microchips.
It brings us right back to our original question. The spreadsheet says the United States should win easily. The budget, the technology, the sheer number of aircraft, it all points to dominance. But the spreadsheet doesn't account for mountain bunkers, franchise model military command, or the fact that your car's microchip requires Qatari natural gas to be manufactured in Taiwan.
Which leaves us with a critical, lingering question to ponder long after this discussion ends.
What's that?
If unmatched military power, thousands of advanced airstrikes, and the ability to assassinate a head of state on day one can no longer guarantee a quick victory or keep global supply chains safe, how do we need to fundamentally redefine what winning actually looks like in a modern, hyper-connected world?
That is exactly the question to mull over today. When the reality of war breaks the spreadsheet, the old definitions of power simply do not apply anymore. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the narrative, keep looking past the rhetoric to understand how things actually work, and we will catch you next time.